This is a luxury keyboard. It looks cool, sounds cool, and even has a fancy knob. But you know what it also has? Wait, that's really how much it's worth? A luxury price tag. Howdy hey, I'm Hipyo Tech, and I try things so you don't have to. But you know what's really interesting is that people keep buying these keyboards. So I'm here to ask one question, and it's, should you build a luxury keyboard in 2024? I mean, there's lots of different options out there on a budget, so why would you choose this? Well, there's actually a few very good reasons why you should and why you shouldn't, and I'll be getting into those in this video. And one of the first is that you can do your hair in the back of your keyboard. I mean, that's great. Now, in order to do that, we're not just going halfway. I've got a $645 keyboard build that I'm going to be building for you in order to show you true luxury. Now, if you're new to keyboards, you're probably incredibly confused. What's a luxury keyboard? What is this keyboard? And if you're experienced with keyboards, you're probably thinking, Hipyo, there's more than just one keyboard out there. But don't worry, I'll explain everything.
Oh my gosh, Alfred, listen.
Now, first, I had to start with the luxury keyboard. And this box that was sent to me by Wuche Studios is just a plain cardboard box. You guys are serious? This is all you could put forward for a luxury keyboard build? I mean, okay, I guess I'll open it and see what happens. Okay, there's a box in a box. This is getting better, but I mean, still not that luxurious, guys. What's going on? Now, similar to Louis Vuitton or Hermes or some luxury brand, Oh, okay. I was gonna say, you hope to expect something fancier with your unboxing and a metal briefcase inside of a... There's a drawer. Oh my God. This actually really reminds me of a camera I just spent $6,000 on from Leica, because all of these keyboard parts are packaged in their own fancy individual boxes. Now, it's not a very good reason, but already we do have a reason why someone might be interested in a luxury keyboard, as the unboxing experience is part of the experience with the product. Now, if I didn't mention it already, I'll be looking at the Freya 68 Ultra. This is a group buy keyboard from Wuche Studios, and it did just start its group buy, so I'll have it linked down below, but what that means is that you have to wait quite a long time for it. And unfortunately, in the keyboard world, group buys, which are basically Kickstarters, are the main way that you get luxury or fancy or custom keyboards. Now you're probably wondering, will this keyboard file my taxes? Will it restore my relationships? Well, you can buy a wireless upgrade and get 2 batteries. That'll help, right? It also comes with a cable and some screwdrivers and a bunch of other stuff that we'll be getting into soon, like these silica gel snacks. Yum yum. Now you're probably also wondering, how luxury is this keyboard that you're looking at today, Hipyo? And it's definitely not the most luxurious, as keyboards can get incredibly fancy and incredibly expensive. But this is what I would consider the high end, as this keyboard starts at $320 US, and the specific version that I have here, well, that's $440. Now, this keyboard is estimated to ship in May, and usually I avoid group buys unless someone has a very proven track record, which Wuche Studios does. But if you're new to keyboards, you're still probably wondering why? And that's a couple of different reasons. Now, for quite the longest time, the keyboard market was primarily luxury stuff or really, really cheap stuff, and there wasn't really an in-between. Now that the in-between market has developed, the luxury stuff becomes a bit more interesting. As, I don't know, is this an in-between? Now the craftsmanship here is pretty incredible. This PVD silver weight, I put my fingerprints on it. It looks pretty great. Ignore the scratch on the right, that's my fault. You can even use the weight to check your beard, check your hair, or check your dwindling bank account balance. And speaking of money, it's actually the sales process that makes some of these custom keyboards more interesting, because there's a ton of different color weights you can choose from, different colored top plates, and it really gives you the option to make this your keyboard. It's a lot more personal. Now the Freya definitely doesn't have the most options I've ever seen, but it is pretty good, and this knob is really nice. We'll talk about it more later. And let's talk about those extra boxes, because there's some important stuff here. Like this little slider that comes with the Freya Ultra, which is the more expensive version of the board that I have here. It can also be swapped out for just some keys if you want, but that's really gonna throw off your home row. At least it does for me. Anytime a board has a left macro, I can't use it. This board also has a very interesting dual plate option, but I am worried that it's gonna be a little bit rattly, because there's a lot of different combos you could do here. Now, I was sent the aluminum outer frame and the polycarbonate inner frame, and this is kind of gonna allow for some flexibility, kind of like the flex cuts in this hot swap PCB, which we won't actually be using because I'm going to be using the non-flex cut version, which I'll look at later. There's also quite a respectable amount of foam so that you can mod this keyboard as you see fit. Now, the fun part about custom keyboards is that you can customize the sound and the feel to fit what you prefer. So I'll be talking about these foams in a little bit. But first, let's get started on the build, because odds are, if you buy a luxury keyboard, there's a very good chance that you have to build it yourself. And you're probably wondering, wait, if it's luxury, why don't I just have someone build it for me? And I mean, I guess you could have someone build it for you, but that kind of gets rid of some of the fun. Now, I have these stabilizers that came with the board, and they are factory lubed, which means that I probably don't need to lube them myself, and that's not going to come back and bite me whatsoever. I'm pretty sure these are the same stabilizers that I used in the Zoom 75, and it turned out really good in that, so I'm just going to screw them into my PCB and not think about it later for the rest of the build. Now, when you're building your own keyboard, you can choose from a million different types of switches. And originally, I was going to go with these jade switches that have a little metal bit at the bottom because I thought that was going to be cool. But then they were incredibly inconsistent, and I regretted everything. Now, maybe I'll be looking at these jade switches in the future, but not right now because I'm going to fall back on my good buddies, the Morandis. Now, if you're looking at building your first custom keyboard, I recommend you check out some of my beginner guides because I can't really get that in depth, but these are a linear switch that I really enjoy. They're factory lubed, they thawk, I guess, sometimes. And in general, they're just kind of one of my favorite switches because they're really consistent. Like, I've had over, 1,000, 1,500 of these in various builds. And for this specific build, I'm just going to be putting them into the plate first because it'll make it a little bit easier. And there you go, with a little bit of magic, it's all done. Now, for a luxury keyboard, I could have gone with a switch that's like $1.50 per, but honestly, with switches, you get crazy diminishing returns nowadays, and more money does not equal better in a lot of cases. It really all comes down to preference. And speaking of cases, I'm going to use my WoW stick to unscrew the case here, and voila. Now, it is worth noting here that the board I'm looking at here is a prototype, so there are going to be some issues with this board that you won't typically see in the final version of the board, and there's also some issues that will be addressed in the final version 100%. And I'll mention the issues as I see them. Don't worry, they'll be mentioned. Now, one thing I was really excited for about this board was these little springs, because this board is spring mounted, spring gasket mounted, which should is the key word here, give this a very bouncy, enjoyable typing experience, and there's definitely not going to be any issues with that. The slider module is super easy to install, and honestly, I'm very excited about this thing as well. You just give it 2 screws and it's in. Don't take that out of context, please. Now, one thing that I hear a lot is that, oh, Hipyo, building keyboards is really daunting and scary, and I can't do that. But if you ever built a Lego set as a kid, then you can definitely build a keyboard nowadays. Like, even if it's a solder PCB, soldering isn't hard, it's just toxic fumes. Next, I installed these little rubber bloop blops onto the plate, and I started to appreciate this gasket performance. This is very flexy, and definitely won't cause, it caused issues. Now, I can only assume that this will be fixed in the final version, but anytime my plate is just resting on the springs normally, I get interference in my PCB. This actually took me quite a lot of troubleshooting to figure out which part was making contact and causing the interference, and I think it was somewhere along the right side. Now, eventually I did position the PCB in a way that there was no interference and I could type on this perfectly normally, but then the case tolerances were a bit off. You're probably thinking, Hipyo, that's so many issues with a luxury keyboard. Why is it even luxury then? Well, actually, all of these are prototype issues that Wuche says they will be fixing. However, I felt like it would be pretty dishonest to not tell you that I had to run into these issues and that I will be fixing them later in this video, after I fix my connection with this knob. This is probably the highlight of this board and what makes it really cool. It's a touch screen on a knob. On release, it's gonna have some software connectivity and a smartphone app, but I can't necessarily use that. But I can use this volume slider, which I really enjoy. Now, one reason why most people really like custom keyboards is that they generally support VIA, which is a software that lets you rebind your keys and do a bunch of very fun macros and everything like that. It's kind of the gold standard for custom keyboard software, and there are people that literally will not consider any keyboard unless it supports it. So there you go, it supports VIA. Now, as far as keycaps go on a luxury build, I felt like I kind of had to use GMK.
GMK, that's the name.
Wait.
Let me tell you, man, that day, that's the same.
Now, originally, I was going to do metal keycaps, but Keyboard literally used the same exact keycaps on the Freya that I was going to do. So check out his video if you want to hear metal keycaps on this keyboard. And then let me know what I should do with $300 metal keycaps. But in this case, I have GMK Fuji from Canon Keys. And wow, this is what $175 on keycaps gets you. Nice, I love GMK. Can we cut to my diss track?
Let me tell you, quality down the drain.
Anyways, yes, you heard me right. This keycap set was $175. Well, originally, I did get it as a 2-for-1 sale. So it was more like 90, but still technically 175. Which, if you're counting, that puts this total build at $645 US, which is quite the pretty penny. Now, is that pretty penny worth it? Well, we'll talk about that right after I fix these stabilizers, because you know how earlier I said they were going to be great and I was going to forget about them? Yeah, well, they actually weren't great, so I just shot a little bit of Permatex dielectric grease in there and bada bing, bada boom, they're great now. Other than aesthetics, which is the #1 reason why you'd buy basically any luxury good in the world, there is quality. And because this is a prototype with a few issues like this loose plate tolerance, it's a little bit harder to judge quality, but the materials used here are pretty impeccable. The finishes look great, the whole thing looks like a tank, and this does definitely feel really nice. Which, feeling really nice is really great when it's gonna be a tool that you use every single day. Like some people spend $600 on a t-shirt. Now, I'm gonna be getting to the foam in just a second, like don't you worry, foam gang. But before I show you the sound test of the board, there's actually a couple things I need to fix to make it similar to what your experience would be when you actually buy this keyboard. And these are actually really interesting tools that you can use to troubleshoot your own keyboard at home. First, there was a little bit too much leeway on these pegs, so I surrounded them with some painter's tape. This is one of the prototype issues that they said they'd be fixing. And then second, I cut out just a little bit more tape and I put it on the top of the case so that I could properly seal it, as the screws weren't actually long enough to properly screw this thing together. Prototype issues. Now, with that resolved, the keyboard looks stunning and I love these keycaps on it. I mean, yeah. You know, I got inspired by a keyboard build when I bring out my monitor and I do like the bokeh background B-roll. And typing on this thing does feel really nice. Before I put any of the foam in or anything, here's a stock sound test. Now, personally, without the foam in there, it's not my cup of tea, but I know some people that absolutely swear by that sound profile, so, you know, all power to you. And this is just one specific build for this keyboard, so I recommend you check out some other reviewers' builds of this keyboard to see what theirs turned out like. But as I go and fill the keyboard with foam, let's talk about some other reasons why you might want a luxury keyboard. Now, besides super specific features like a screen or anything that really stands out, in most keyboards, you're gonna get a similar keyboard experience, and there's just gonna be minor details that might be important to some people, but might not be important to others. Like this keyboard has a really solid aluminum case and a nice stainless steel weight option. That is a fingerprint magnet, oh my god. But I've seen some really fancy keyboards that are made entirely out of CNC'd polycarbonate, which that's not metal. Now, for the foam, I'm simply just gonna put the PE foam, the plate foam, and the back of the PCB foam. I personally opted not to put the batteries or the battery foam in this one, as I really wanted to keep some of the case sound intact. But if you try this at home, I recommend you try every different combination, as that's half the fun of it. Now, ultimately in this video, I just showed you one luxury keyboard build, and there's a ton of different keyboards out there. People think Kohaku or Unicorn or Keycult. Maybe not Keycult. But ultimately, should you build a luxury keyboard in 2024? Well, if there was any time to build one, now is definitely the best time, as keyboard builds are just getting better and better as people refine their craft. Supply chains are improving, group buy times are shortening, which is really great, and there are more options than ever. So if you have the funds, I really recommend you do try out some really fancy custom keyboards, as I think you'll have a lot of fun building one. But let me know what you think. Is it a waste of money? Maybe.